Committee will come to order again. We'll now resume questioning under the 5-minute rule. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Whitaker, for being here today. On January 28th, you made a statement, and I'm trying to understand more about that. You mentioned, and this is a direct quote, right now, referring to the Mueller investigation, right now the investigation is close to being completed. What was the basis for that statement that you made, Mr. Whitaker?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. I had a press conference announcing an important indictment related to Huawei and their alleged stealing of intellectual property of an American company. During that course of that press conference, I was asked questions about the special counsel's investigation, and I prefaced that answer by saying I can't talk about an ongoing investigation like the special counsel's investigation. And as I sit here today, I really don't have anything to add to what I said.
Well, it seems to me that you did talk about an ongoing investigation, and therefore you can understand, I'm sure we'd like to know what you meant by what you said. In that same statement, you said, quote, you were, quote, comfortable that the directions that were made will be reviewed through the various means we have, unquote. What does that mean?
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. I would refer you to the special counsel regulations again, the question the answer that I gave to the inquiry was regarding the timing of the special counsel's investigation. I have nothing, as I sit here, to add to that, but I do want to mention that the special counsel's regulations, by their very nature, say that the Attorney General will receive a report, that will be a confidential report, and that report will cover the decisions. And so I was talking about, as Attorney General, as Acting Attorney General, if and when I receive that report. Again, I only have less than a week, as you know, before Mr. Barr comes on board, that I would review those decisions pursuant to that report.
So is it fair to say that really what you're saying is that the special counsel's investigation is proceeding within the scope of the authorities set forth in Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's May 2017 order? Is that exactly what you're saying?
Thank you for an opportunity to clarify that. I think what I just explained to you is that the special counsel's investigation is proceeding consistent with the regulations that outline why the appointment happened, consistent with Mr. Rosenstein's appointment.
All right, thank you very much for that clarification. I'd just like to note that to some extent, it is hard to ignore that the willingness to discuss ongoing investigations has not been applied evenly. I mean, you've just mentioned today the Roger Stone indictment, and that's an ongoing matter. But let me get back to an opportunity you have to clear the air. Many have speculated that your appointment was based on your public appearances that harshly criticized the special counsel's investigation. Prior to your hiring as Chief of Staff to then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, I'd like to know, did you discuss or share your private opinions of the special counsel investigation with President Trump or other White House officials such as Mr. Kelly or Trump family members or public surrogates like Mr. Giuliani? And I would note that this is not covered by executive privilege because at that time you were a private citizen.
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. I came to Washington, D.C. in October of 2017 to be Attorney General Sessions' Chief of Staff. I have the greatest respect, as you know, for General Sessions, and I am really, honored to carry out the role of acting Attorney General.
If I may, that's very nice, but that wasn't the question I asked.
Well, as you know, I am, as I mentioned, honored to serve as acting Attorney General, and I'm honored that the President selected me to be the acting Attorney General. I can assure this committee that before appointing me to this position, the President did not ask for and I did not provide any commitments, promises concerning the special counsel's investigation or any other investigation, as I mentioned in my opening statement.
That's not the question I asked, sir. And I see that my time is about to expire. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to add, I know that we're going to have follow-up depositions under oath.
I'll allow
We'll add this.
I'll allow you to
question.
ask the question again more specifically and ask the witness to answer the question specifically and not to continue filibustering.
The question is whether you shared your private opinions of the special counsel investigation with President Trump, other White House officials such as John Kelly, Trump family members, public surrogates such as Rudy Giuliani. At the time that I'm referencing, you were a private citizen before you were hired, so it is not covered by executive privilege. Did you do that?
Congresswoman, just to be clear, you're asking me whether or not I talked with anybody essentially in the President's circle or at the White House about my views of the special counsel's investigation.
Correct.
When I was a private citizen
Correct.
and not at the Department of Justice?
Correct.
No, I did not.
All right.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Acting Attorney General, as you mentioned earlier, there are other important matters within the purview of the Justice Department and within the oversight responsibilities of this committee, besides fishing expeditions trying to get the goods on this president in an apparent effort to impeach him. For example, 70,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in 2017. Now, I'm old enough to remember back in the mid-'80s when President Ronald Reagan and his wife felt so compelled to do something about the scourge of drugs in this country that the effort to just say no began and other efforts following that. And that was because back at that time we had 10,000 deaths a year due to drug overdoses, and we now have over 70,000 deaths. So it's gotten, unfortunately, over time, worse, not better. Most of the increase in deaths in 2017 were due to synthetic drugs, synthetic opioids specifically, like fentanyl, which accounted for a significant number of those deaths. This is clearly an epidemic which has been declared a state of emergency nationwide by the President and has deeply affected families in my home state of Ohio as well as families all across this nation. What efforts and resources has or does the Justice Department intend to use to combat this growing epidemic, and what help can Congress provide to assist you in your efforts?
Congressman, I appreciate that question, and I know how Ohio has been dramatically affected by the opioid crisis. We have done a lot at the Department of Justice, and I would like to partner with this committee, and I'm sure General Barr would as well, to combat and have additional tools to combat this opioid crisis. But some of the things that we have done is we set up in 2017 the Opioid Fraud and Detection Unit, which was a way that the Justice Department could utilize data to help combat the devastating opioid crisis. We did the largest healthcare fraud takedown in June of 2018. We set up the PILL Task Force, otherwise known as the Prescription Interdiction and Litigation Task Force, in February of 2018. We set up a really innovative way called Operation SOS, which was Synthetic Opioid Surge. General Sessions and I went down to Tampa, Florida, where we saw Manatee County had taken an AUSA and embedded them once a week into the sheriff's office in order to take every fentanyl overdose case. And they dramatically reduced the number of overdose deaths in Manatee County, and we decided to take that model and apply it to the most affected states and districts that could really make a dramatic difference in saving lives.
Thank you. Let me just, if I could, let me stop you there. I just have a follow-up question along the same topic. And the President addressed this to a considerable degree in a State of the Union the other night. And do you have an opinion, is there a relationship between enhancing border security, particularly at our southern border, and making at least some progress in reducing the scourge of drug addiction in this country?
Congressman, absolutely there is a connection between the drugs that are being imported through our southern border, which is a large majority of those drugs, and the opioid crisis we now face. In fact, I went to China in August as Chief of Staff for then General Sessions. He asked me to go to talk to the Chinese about what more they could do to reduce the amount of fentanyl that's being produced in China. And we had a nice dialogue with some high-level government officials, and the President, as you know, has agreed with General Xi to reduce fentanyl and eliminate fentanyl production in China. And one of the ways that China's agreed to do that was by scheduling the analogs of fentanyl. It's a very serious problem, and I know Ohio is dramatically affected by it.
Thank you very much. I've only got about 30 more seconds, so let me just touch on one last thing. I know you've only got a week left, so you probably will personally...
Less than a week, actually.
Yeah, less than a week. Yesterday, this committee, in a bipartisan manner, passed the No Oil Producing and Exporting Cartels Act of 2019. This is something that I had introduced almost 20 years ago, along with my Democratic colleague, John Conyers, who was chair and ranking member of this committee over the years, that would basically give the Attorney General the authorization to bring suit against oil cartels when they artificially manipulate the prices and we all pay for this at the gas pump time and time again. So I know we've been in contact with the Justice Department, and we look forward to working with your successor in that effort. I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to make about that.
Congressman, I'm fully aware of that bill, and I look forward to the Department of Justice working with you to successfully not only pass it, but implement it.
Thank you, and I'd like to give Mr. Nadler and some of our Democratic colleagues, as well as Mr. Collins and others, a lot of credit for that as well. So thank you very much. Yield back.
I thank the chairman very much. This is extraordinary times, Mr. Attorney General. We know that the former director of the FBI testified to the House Intelligence Committee in an open hearing that there was an active investigation into the associates of the Trump campaign, and he was fired subsequently. Mr. Mueller was then hired. Investigations have secured numerous indictments, convictions, or guilty pleas, and of course they deal with perjury charges like obstruction of justice, perjury, false statements. So at the current rate, we're seeing so many of the Trump organizations being indicted. And with the short time that I have, I want to make sure that your questions are answered in a yes or no matter. This is the first oversight hearing we have had in the Justice Department in almost 15 months. You did not have a confirmation hearing, and you have not yet appeared for an oversight hearing. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, I am the acting
Yes or
Attorney
no?
General.
Have you appeared before an oversight hearing in the Congress?
Congresswoman, I have not.
It has been 10 years.
Before.
Witness will answer the question as asked, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if the Department inquiry, if he feels that a yes or no is appropriate, he'll answer in a yes or no. If he does not feel it's appropriate, he should be able to answer in the appropriate, as many Democrat administration officials have done before this committee before. That is unreal.
The member has only 5 minutes, and if
we've just discovered that we have a
wants a
5-minute
yes
rule,
or
that's
no answer,
amazing.
she's entitled to it. I will not allow the witness to stall and waste members' time. The
Where
witness
were
will
you
answer
when
the
Ms.
question.
Lynch and Mr. Holder were
Chairman,
here?
Witness will answer the
Mr.
question.
Chairman, may I have my time restored? I think it was at 4 minutes.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Attorney General, the question is, did you have a confirmation hearing, and has it been more than 10 years since you testified before Congress?
Congresswoman,
Can the clock be restored?
It was. I'm sorry, what was your, I don't know if your time's been restored or not.
Mr. Attorney General, we're not joking here, and your humor is not acceptable. Now, you are here because we have a constitutional duty to ask questions, and the Congress has the right to establish government rules. The rules are that you are here. So I need to ask the question, and I need to have my time restored so that you can behave appropriately. I will behave appropriately as a member of the Judiciary Committee. I'm asked a question. Did you have a confirmation hearing, and have you not yet appeared for an oversight hearing?
Congresswoman, I am an acting Attorney General. I have been appointed according to the Vacancies Reform Act, and I have never appeared in front of Congress for any hearing, even when I was United States Attorney.
I'm asked for a yes or no answer. Is that? Let me, and so you've never appeared. Let me quickly ask a question. Prior to the firing of former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, did you discuss or share your private opinions of the special counsel investigation with the Chief of Staff, Trump family members, and others? Yes or no?
As I previously answered, Congresswoman.
Yes or no, sir?
As I previously answered, Congresswoman, I have not
Yes
discussed.
or no?
As I previously answered, Congresswoman, I have not discussed.
And since you're appointed acting Attorney General, did you discuss or share your private opinions with the special counsel?
Again, the special counsel's investigation is an ongoing investigation, and I have nothing more to say than what I've already said.
So you are denying reports that you shared many one-on-one calls with President Trump and his then Chief of Staff, John Kelly, when Jeff Sessions was still Attorney General?
Again, Congressman, is there someone that provides you the basis for that question, or is that an anonymously sourced
I am asking
article?
the question, sir. Answer the question, yes or no.
Could you repeat the question, please?
So you are denying the reports that you shared many one-on-one calls with President Trump and then his Chief of Staff, John Kelly? Are you denying that, yes or no?
Congresswoman, as I've mentioned several times today in my opening statement and otherwise,
Yes or no?
I'm not talking about the conversations that I've had with the President of the United States or his senior staff.
So that is a no?
I don't think you can assume anything from that.
Well, let me just pursue on my line of questioning. Since the investigation has secured numerous indictments, I would like to pursue the line of questioning with respect to your understanding of the Mueller investigation and the review that you've given. Have you given an extensive review?
Congresswoman, I have been briefed on the special counsel's investigation.
Do you believe the involvement of the hostile foreign entities interfering with the elections is more severe than the false representation of voter fraud in elections? Do you believe that a foreign interference with the elections is more severe?
Congresswoman, I think foreign interference in our election system in the United States is a very serious and ongoing concern. I also believe that voter fraud is a serious concern.
After you left office, you pursued a series of other political offices, one of which was the United States Senate. Yes or no, if during the pursuit of that office, a hostile foreign power contacted you to offer dirt on your opponent, which at the same time included other candidates such as Steve King and now Senator Joni Ernst, would you have contacted the FBI?
Congresswoman, I'm not here to
Yes or
address
no?
hypothetical questions, and I'm here for an oversight hearing. I don't believe, I was very
You have
unsuccessful
the
in my Senate
responsibility of
campaign.
answering the question. Would you have contacted the FBI if you were asked to take dirt on your opponents?
Congresswoman, if I was contacted by a foreign national or a foreign country when I was a candidate for the United States Senate, I would have most likely reached out to the FBI, but it didn't happen, so it's hard for me to answer your hypothetical
With
question.
respect to civil rights, you have not, under your jurisdiction, prosecuted one voting rights case. Is that correct?
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Congresswoman, just so I have a complete answer on this, we'll follow up in writing as to the voting rights cases that we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Gohmert. Let's see here. Mr. Jordan.
Thank the Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, why did Rod Rosenstein send a memo to Bob Mueller on August 2nd, 2017 concerning the scope of the special counsel investigation?
Congressman, thank you for that question, and I know this is of a great interest to you, and I hope we can have a discussion about this today. The special counsel regulations require a scoping of the special counsel's investigation that identifies the subject and the targets of the investigation. So I am certain that it would have identified the scope of the investigation pursuant to the special counsel's.
Well, my question is not what, I'll get to that. My question is why, because it was 2.5 months after the special counsel was formed. So let's go back to the beginning document, which you told the chairman earlier you were You're completely briefed on the special counsel's investigation. I want to go, it's just a one-page document. Order number 3915-2017 says this, Mr. Whitaker. The special counsel is authorized to conduct the investigation, including any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. That's pretty broad. Do you agree?
Yeah, and in my experience, it's consistent with other appointments of special counsels.
That's fine. I think it's maybe too broad, but it's as broad as you can get. One-page order, go do your investigation, and anything that arises out of it, you can investigate as well. But then 2.5 months later, we get this 3-page memo from Rod Rosenstein, Acting Attorney General, to Robert Mueller, Special Counsel. Title says, Scope of the Investigation, Definition of Authority. This is what confuses me. Because in this memo, that only Mr. Mueller, and my guess is you and Mr. Rosenstein and a few people at the Justice Department have seen, most of it's blacked out. In this memo, it says this: the following allegations were within the scope of the investigation at the time of your appointment and are within the scope of the order. Well, if that's true, why do you have to say it? If you could do it all along, why do you have to put it in a memo?
Congressman Jordan, first of all, I was, because of General Sessions' recusal from the special counsel's investigation, I was also recused from that investigation. And so I was not.
I'm not asking that. I'm asking, you said you were fully briefed. The chairman asked you
that.
But
you're asking me why at the time Rod Rosenstein.
I'm asking you why 2.5 months after the broadest order you can have, why did Rod Rosenstein say, hey, you could do this all along, but now I'm putting it in a memo? And I'll tell you what really troubles me, Mr. Whitaker, is right after that statement, the following allegations were within the scope of the investigation at the time of your appointment and are within the scope of the order. Right after that, you know what? You know what happens? Everything's redacted. Look at this. The whole darn thing. So if you could do it all along, and you have to send a memo to them 2.5 months later, and then you redact everything after it. You know what's under the redactions, Mr. Whitaker?
I do, sir.
You do. Are there names under the redactions, Mr. Whitaker?
In my experience with investigations generally, you would not have a public document identify targets or subject matter of an investigation, especially if someone is not ultimately charged with a crime.
Let me frame it this way. Did Rod Rosenstein give the special counsel the authority to investigate specific Americans?
Congressman, Mr. Rosenstein, acting as the Attorney General because of Mr. Sessions' recusal, gave authorization and jurisdiction to the special counsel. And so, yes, under the special counsel regulations, that's the whole purpose of the special counsel.
So I want to make, you said yes, so there are specific names 2.5 months into the investigation that Rod Rosenstein gave the special counsel specific American names to go investigate.
Congressman, as you
Because
know,
if that's the case, then it's, well, I hope you, I want to know yes or no. I
as
hope
you
you
know,
answer.
this is the subject of an ongoing investigation. And I spoke to you generally about investigation.
But I'm asking you a specific, or let me ask it this way. Can you give us assurances that there are not specific names under this 70% redacted memo that, that Rod Rosenstein sent to the special counsel?
Congressman Jordan, I know this is
And you know why I'm
very
asking
important
this,
subject to
Mr.
you.
Attorney General? Because in this country, we don't investigate people, we investigate crimes. And if there are specific American citizens' names in this redacted, and I asked Mr. Rosenstein to see this, and he got all mad and huffy with me in his office and wouldn't show it to me. But I think the American people, if this alters, changes, and names specific Americans, the scope of the investigation of the special counsel, don't you think it's appropriate for the American citizens to know the full parameters of an investigation into the guy they made President of the United States?
Congressman, let me be very specific about this, because you are right. We investigate crimes, not individuals.
That's why I'm asking the question. I would like a yes or no answer. Are there names mentioned under this redacted portion of this memo?
On that, as I mentioned before, that memo props up a confidential investigation, as is every Department of Justice.
Simple question, Mr. Whitaker. Are there names, specific American names mentioned in this redacted, 70% redacted memo that happens 2.5 months after the special counsel gets his order to start his investigation, where he was given the broadest latitude you can possibly have?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I would just refer the Congressman to the general practice of the Department of Justice, that that we investigate crimes and not individuals.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Attorney General, the Inspector General of the GSA have a rather scathing report on the GSA's decision not to address significant issues concerning the government's post office and its lease to the Trump family concerning the Emoluments Clause. And it was said that GSA attorneys said they did not refer the matter to OLC, but a senior attorney told the IG that the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, knew about the old post office lease and it was up to them to do something. Are you aware of anything the Justice Department did to look into violations of Emoluments Clause at the Trump Hotel?
Congressman, the Emoluments Clause, as it relates to the Trump Hotel, is the subject of several ongoing litigation matters.
Right.
And so while I can acknowledge that I am aware of the, not only of the situation you described, but generally the litigation surrounding the Emoluments Clause, as the Acting Attorney General sitting here today, I'm unable to talk specifically about those cases.
You can't say if there are any memos from the Office of Legal Counsel regarding Emoluments Clause violations and limitations?
Congressman, as I sit here today, the Emoluments Clause, as it relates to the Trump organization, especially the hotel in Washington, D.C., is the subject of ongoing litigation.
And the Justice Department's helping to represent the president in those suits, is he not? Is that appropriate when it's a violation of him making personal monies out of the Trump Hotel and being charged with violations of the Emoluments Clause by not reporting it to the Congress as he's supposed to by the Constitution? Shouldn't he have his personal lawyers and not Justice Department lawyers represent him for this nefarious conduct?
Congressman, I can understand that this is an important issue to you, but as it relates to the Emoluments Clause and the Department of Justice defense of the President of the United States, it is well within our purpose to be involved in that case.
You said that if the special counsel's investigation looked into President Trump's finances, it'd be crossing a red line. You said that, I think, in a television interview. The Attorney General has made clear that Mr. Rosenstein told the special counsel he could go into any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. If matters arose from the investigation, directly or indirectly, that the Trump family owed lots of money to Russian oligarchs and people real close to Putin, and that affected the actions that they took as the President of the United States on behalf of the United States of America, would you agree that that was not crossing a red line, but in fact was a red line from Moscow that we need to look into?
Congressman, when I made that statement, I was a private citizen and had no publicly available information. I only had publicly available information. And so I made that as a commentator and not as the Acting Attorney General of the United States. I am very familiar with the responsibilities of my office as Acting Attorney General, and we make our decisions based on the law and the facts on a case-by-case basis.
So that's no longer your opinion? It's not crossing a red line for him to look into the finances if they might have interfered with the objective judgment of the president concerning his duty of trust to the United States of America and not to his personal financial interest or his family's.
Congressman, as I mentioned earlier, at the Department of Justice, and as long as I'm Acting Attorney General, we're going to follow the law and the facts wherever they may lead, and we're going to do our jobs with fidelity.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you this. There's been a conviction in the special counsel investigation of Mr. Manafort. Jury trial, conviction. There have been guilty pleas from Flynn, Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos, and Michael Cohen, and dozens of indictments, including 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian companies, and Roger Stone. Would you say the special counsel's investigation is a witch hunt? Are you overseeing a witch hunt?
Congressman, as I've mentioned previously, the special counsel's investigation is an ongoing investigation, and so I think it would be inappropriate for me to—
But you wouldn't oversee a witch hunt, would you? You'd stop a witch hunt, wouldn't you?
Congressman, it would be inappropriate for me to talk about an ongoing investigation.
You said that you're not interfering with the special counsel's investigation. Have you denied him any funds he's requested at all?
Congressman, I can tell this is an important issue for you, but
It's an important issue for the American public and for the whole world.
Congressman, to answer your question directly, I have not denied any funds to the special counsel's investigation.
Have you denied him the opportunity to go any areas where he wanted to investigate or any matters of investigation?
Congressman, as I previously testified, I have not interfered with the special counsel's investigation.
I yield back the balance of my time.
I I thank the gentleman, Mr. Gomert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acting Attorney General, thank you for being here today.
It's good to see you again, Congressman.
I'm amazed that you would be coming since your successor is going to apparently be confirmed next week, and you'll no longer be acting director, so I don't know what kind of suicide wish you had or whatever, but it's good to see you. One thing I wanted to hit first was a statement that you had made, and I want to confirm that these are your words. And I quote, "There is no doubt in the law enforcement community that the vast majority of the illegal drugs in this country is coming over our southern border, a pattern that is true for all crimes generally, and there is no doubt that criminals and cartels seek to exploit weaknesses in our southern border." Are those your words?
While I don't know which speech or statement you're quoting, it sounds like something I would have said, yes.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have said that if you didn't believe that, correct?
Oh, I believe what you're saying. The drugs
Yeah.
and the general illegality that's pouring in through our southern border is having a negative effect on our country.
Now, I want to get to this issue of career officials, since colleagues on the other side of the aisle have made such a big deal about it, that you have not, they accuse you of not following the advice of career officials. Do you know the backgrounds of the people that are working directly under you and directly under Rod Rosenstein?
Congressman, I sit on top of an organization that has 115,000
I'm talking about the people
employees.
directly to you and directly to Deputy Rosenstein.
I am familiar with the people that report to both of us, yes.
Yeah, 'cause,
Although, I will tell you, I think Rod Rosenstein as Deputy Attorney General has over 100 direct reports as Deputy Attorney General.
well, and that was something I recommended to Attorney General Sessions, that he needed to reorganize and have some of those people reporting directly to him. But one of the mistakes, I think my dear friend Jeff Sessions, for whom I have immense respect, one of the mistakes that I saw him making, he was listening to people who loved Sally Yates, loved her efforts to disrupt anything that President Trump tried to do. They loved what President Obama did through the Justice Department. And in fact, I had informed Jeff that that his contact at with the NSC was sitting on his notices, so either developed conflicts or wasn't properly prepared, and that was Tashina Gahar. And she reported directly to Rosenstein. The AG should have somebody, the liaison with the NSC should report directly to the AG and not go through Rod Rosenstein, and especially when they are setting the Attorney General up to be harmed. But this, and then Anthony Ferranti, I know currently, apparently he's the Senior Managing Director of FTI Consulting. He was another one that some considered a career position at the DOJ. Let's see, he had Jordan Kelly there. She's currently Director of Cybersecurity Policy and Instant Response at the NSC through the White House. There were reports that she met routinely with the Mueller investigators. You know, between these people who, like Tashina Gahar, just thought Yates was wonderful, I would hope that wisdom in you as acting director, wisdom in the incoming Attorney General will be to look at the backgrounds, look at the people who are political hacks, and figure out, oh, they're giving me advice on this. This is not for my well-being. This is to hurt the President of the United States. And I know you may just have another week, but I would encourage you that as people make a big deal about career, look beyond career, look where their loyalties are, because even though they may be in a career position, if their loyalties are not to the Attorney General and not to the President of the United States and are more political than they are constitutional, disregard what they say.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, General Whitaker. Do you agree with the President's statement that the Russia investigation is a witch hunt?
As I mentioned previously, Congressman, I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment about an ongoing investigation.
Well, you commented about the Roger Stone investigation, which is ongoing, did you not?
Congressman, just to be clear about
You
this.
did comment on that. I mean, we heard you comment on the Roger Stone investigation. Why would you comment on the Roger Stone investigation, but you are reluctant to answer our questions about the Mueller investigation?
Well, that's a good question, Congressman. And my comments about the Roger Stone investigation were merely to acknowledge that I was aware that CNN had appeared to receive or was at the
You don't know
arrest
whether or not the
location.
CNN reporter was camped out with no advanced knowledge, or whether or not he was tipped off or not. Isn't that
Congressman,
a fact?
that is true, but I'm very concerned.
Well, let me move on.
That
Let me move.
operation
Hold
by
on,
the
sir.
FBI
I'm
is-
controlling the time. Let me move on. I'd like to take a moment to better understand your decision not to recuse yourself from the supervision of the special counsel's investigation. Isn't it a fact, sir, that you received your final ethics guidance on this matter on December 19th, 2018?
I appreciate this question, and I'm glad this is an
It's a pretty
opportunity for me
direct
to address
question.
this.
Did you receive your final guidance on that question on
As you
December
know,
19th?
we have communicated with Congress the entire process that I went through to address any recusal questions that I might have, and I had no conflict of interest. I had
Let
no
me just
financial.
ask you, I understand you take that position, but my simple question is, isn't it a fact that you received your final ethics guidance on that question on December 19th, 2018?
Congressman, we laid out very explicitly the process that we went through, and ultimately the decision whether or not to recuse was my decision.
Mr.
and I made
Whitaker,
that decision,
you were asked
very
a direct,
comfortable with that decision.
Mr. Whitaker, you were asked a direct question, and it's getting a little tiresome hearing you stall and wasting the member's time. The member only has 5 minutes. He asked you a specific question. Did you last receive advice on that on December 18th? The answer ought to be yes or no, or some other date, or I don't remember. But we don't need a speech. The gentleman may repeat.
Chairman.
No, the gentleman may repeat
No,
his
Mr.
question.
Chairman, I mean, if we're gonna counsel the witness and act as his attorney on how he should answer, are you answering the question or is there a witness answering the question?
I'm
It's a
asking
yes
the
or
witness
no.
not to stall.
And we have endured that many times here when he's trying to answer the
Gentleman is-
question in the way that he is asked. It's-
Point of order, point of order.
The gentleman is out of order. Mr. Johnson has the floor.
And I'd like to
Your
have
time will
my-
be restored.
Thank you, sir. Sir, isn't it a fact that career officials at DOJ recommended to you that you recuse yourself to avoid an appearance of a conflict of interest or bias? That was the guidance that you got from career DOJ officials about your participation or oversight of the Mueller investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I made my recusal decision by myself.
But there
after
were
consulting
career
with
DOJ officials who advised you that you should not touch that investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman,
Yes or no?
I consulted with career ethics officials. I consulted with my senior staff. I consulted with the Office of Legal Counsel. It was my decision to make. I decided not to recuse. I'm happy to walk through the step-by-step advice that I received.
There were
But I consulted.
There were four individuals who you consulted who advised you that you had the ability to not recuse yourself from this investigation. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, the regulations actually say
Four
that I have the-
individuals advised you that you did not have to recuse yourself. Is that correct?
Congressman, let me be clear. It was
You're
my
not
decision
being
to
clear,
make,
sir,
and I
other
made the
than
decision.
in your obstruction and refusal to answer
I'm not
my
obstructing
question.
anything. I'm answering your question.
Well, you are
I
obstructing.
consulted with a lot of people regarding my recusal, but it was my
Well, you're
decision.
not telling me who it was. Who
followed
did you
the
consult
regulations.
with?
As I mentioned, I consulted with
Name,
career ethics
name me
officials.
some names.
I consulted with my senior staff, and I consulted with the Office of Legal Counsel.
Name me some names, sir.
Well, one person would be the Assistant Attorney General for
What's
our
his
Office
name?
of Legal
Or her
Counsel.
name?
Steve Engel.
And who
He's
else?
a Senate confirmed.
Who else did you consult with?
I also consulted with his principal deputy.
And that person's name is?
His name is Curtis Gannon.
And who else did you consult with, sir?
Congressman, I
I'm
don't
asking
think
you
the
a
public
pretty
exposure
clear
of
question,
these folks.
sir. Who else did you consult with about whether or not you should recuse yourself from the Mueller investigation?
Generally, who did I consult with?
I want to know specifically who you talked to.
Okay, well, I talked to Brad Weinsheimer, who is the senior career official at the Department of Justice.
And he advised you that your recusal was unnecessary, or did he advise you to recuse?
He actually could not identify any precedent for me to recuse. He said it was a close call. He said that, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. He said that my other public statements did recognize the professionalism and competence of the special counsel. He said that out of an abundance of caution, that if asked, he would recommend a certain course. But again, he also said.
Did he recognize that you recused yourself?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Can I finish?
The witness may finish his answer.
Okay. He also said, Congressman, that the decision was mine to make based on the regulations of the Department of Justice, and I made that decision, and I stand by that decision.
Mr. Radcliffe.
Mr. Attorney General, I spent a number of years as a federal prosecutor, and because of that service, I have literally hundreds of friends at the Department of Justice right now and at its component agencies like the FBI, folks that I have tremendous respect for. And so I appreciate your stated desire earlier today to want to highlight their good work. And for the new members of the Judiciary Committee, an oversight hearing is typically where that would take place, where an Attorney General would give an accounting of the work of 115,000 men and women in the Justice Department and provide some idea of the vision with respect to the department's priorities. Priorities like drug and human trafficking, preventing terrorism, reducing gun and gang violence. Now, earlier this week, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle indicated that they had a great desire to reduce gun violence in this country. In fact, we had an 8-hour hearing with 6 witnesses that talked about the need to reduce gun violence in this country. We started this hearing at 9:30 this morning. It's now 12:30 in the afternoon, and I haven't seen you field a single question from the other side of the aisle about any of the enforcement priorities of the Department of Justice. Despite the fact that you are the head of an organization that has a greater ability to impact and reduce gun violence than anyone or anything in the country. So I may be the only person today that wants to ask you a question about that, but I'm going to use the remainder of my time for that purpose. When I was at the Department of Justice, we had a very successful initiative called Project Safe Neighborhood. It was a program that took guns out of the hands of criminal offenders. It was a successful program that was killed by the Obama administration. The Obama Justice Department ended it. I understand that it has been reinstated during the Trump administration. I'd like you to inform us about its progress as well as any other measures or programs or enforcement priorities of the Department of Justice with respect to reducing gun violence in this country.
Thank you, Congressman. As you know, we served as United States attorneys together until you went into politics and I went into private practice. I want to talk specifically, and this is a really good question, about Project Safe Neighborhoods. In 2017, the Attorney General Sessions announced the expansion of Project Safe Neighborhoods, which encourages U.S. attorneys' offices to work specifically with their unique communities they serve to develop a customized crime reduction strategy. One study showed that when you and I were doing PSN, it reduced crime overall by 4.1%, and with case studies showing reductions up to 42% of violent crime. We had the Project Safe Neighborhoods National Conference, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and I can tell you that especially in our largest cities, our 29 major cities, We are seeing a reduction of violent crime because of U.S. attorneys specifically working with their sheriffs and police chiefs and their federal and state and local partners in reducing gun violence. You know, some other things that we've done is the Attorney General was one of the 4 cabinet positions that were part of the School Safety Commission that came out with a report in the last several months that gave a practical outline as to how states especially could work to reduce gun violence, including the idea of the ERPOs. And there is, you know, Congressman, I appreciate your tone that this oversight hearing is not a hearing about the types of things that we're talking about, but you know, Congressman, the chairman sent me a letter specifically outlining things that he wanted to talk about, and I don't feel like we've talked about many of those things. So I'm glad that you offer that opportunity to talk about the Department of Justice efforts reducing gun violence.
Sorry about that. Not a problem.
Thank you, Attorney General. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Congressman Jordan.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Whitaker, are there any other memos? Any other memos that Mr. Rosenstein has sent to Mr. Mueller that we don't know about, and if we did, would be redacted like the one that happened on August 2nd, 2017?
Congressman, as you know, the special counsel's investigation is ongoing, and it would be inappropriate for me to talk about any other memos related to that.
Well, Mr. Whitaker, we already know that there's been some modification of the broadest order I think you could have with this August 2nd, 2017 memo. And all I'm asking is, are there any other modifications, any other changes to the parameters of an investigation into the President of the United States?
Congressman, just to be clear, the special counsel understands the scope of its investigation and is complying with all the regulations and orders related to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Whitaker, you and I are both lawyers. My first day of crim law, my professor came in and said, if someone asks you a yes or no question, don't just repeat the question, answer yes or no. Otherwise, during your career, people will think you're not a good lawyer. We know you're a good lawyer. Let's heed that advice going forward. In November 2018, we didn't. The advice is good nonetheless. In November 2018, Chris Wallace asked the president a question. He said, do you know before you appointed him that he, meaning you, had a record that was so critical of Robert Mueller? And the president said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he took views on the Mueller investigation. Do you believe President Trump was telling the truth when he said that he just did not know that you were critical of Mueller before your appointment?
Congressman, the president...
I am going to go back. Right now, I understand how it all worked. I'm just asking you, do you believe the president was telling the truth when he said he did not know that you had been critical of Robert Mueller before making your appointment?
Congressman, I have no reason to believe when I sit here today that the president wasn't saying what he believed.
Who'd you interview with for the chief of staff job? Not for this job, but for the chief of staff job.
It was General Sessions' decision to make. I interviewed with him, and he offered me the job.
And before you got the job, did you ever, before you took this job, did you ever speak with the president about the Mueller probe from May 17, 2017 to September 22nd, 2017?
Are you saying about before I was actually the chief of staff?
I'm saying between May 17, 2017.
Congressman, I had never met the president until after I joined the Department of Justice.
So have you, let me just ask you another question. You didn't communicate with him. Did you communicate with anyone at the White House about the special counsel investigation before September 22nd, 2018?
I assume you're excluding my appearances on CNN. Because I don't know who at the White House was watching my appearances.
If you talked to anybody at the White House, I mean, you've told me that the president wasn't watching those, otherwise he would have been aware of your positions. So I assume the president wasn't watching. Did you talk about those appearances with anyone at the White House?
I did not talk about my appearances on CNN.
Did you talk about your views of the Mueller investigation with anyone at the White House?
I did not talk about my views of the Mueller investigation with any at the White House in this time period, essentially May of 2017, until I joined the Department of Justice in October of 2017.
And when you were, throughout that process, did you ever communicate with anyone? Here's the question. But by my count, you made 6 comments in op-eds, talk radio, or on cable news critical of the special counsel between the time you interviewed in June 2017 and the time you were hired as Chief of Staff to the Attorney General. Did you ever use any intermediaries? Did you have anyone, since the President didn't know, did you have anyone communicate with the White House or anyone at the White House, either staff members, friends, or others, to let them know exactly where you stood as expressed in at least those 6 public statements?
Congressman, I had at the time you described, May of 17 until I joined the department on October 4th of 2017. I didn't have a relationship with the White House.
Did you talk to any White House personnel before you were hired? Anyone at the White House?
Congressman,
That's an easy one. Did you talk to anyone at the White House? Is the answer no?
Congressman, I had previously been at the White House when I was a private citizen to talk about a different position.
No, I understand, but did you talk to anyone at the White House about your views on Mueller? Any personnel at the White House at all before you assumed the position?
In May,
Let me just go forward, because here's the issue. When you became the Attorney General, since becoming the Attorney General, you said that you've been briefed on the special counsel. Did you use anyone else to have communications? Did you do anything to make sure that the White House might have learned some of what you learned in those briefings? Could it be that someone else on your staff might have spoken to someone at the White House, since you told us you didn't?
Congressman, I'm not aware of that happening.
Who else, how many people were in those briefings with you when you're briefed about the Mueller investigation?
Congressman, I'm not going to go into the specifics of the briefing, but it was a very limited group. There was only one member of my staff who was present with me.
And have you ever attempted to use any intermediaries to get information to the President or others on his staff?
No, I have not attempted to use any intermediaries to get information to the President.
So I'll close, Mr. Chairman, just by saying this is going to be a long hearing. We're going to go on for a while. The concern that we have, Mr. Whitaker, is that there was no Senate confirmation here. We're not the Senate, but the administration justified their decision in picking you under the Vacancies Reform Act. There was a law on the books for the Attorney General's succession and the authority to oversee the special counsel's work. It goes from one Senate-confirmed official to another, from the AG, Deputy AG, Associate Attorney AG, Solicitor General, Assistant Attorney General, the Attorney General in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, Assistant AG for National Security, Assistant AG in charge of the Criminal Division, and on and on and on. None of them are the Chief of Staff to the Attorney General. I think what we're trying to figure out is, why is it exactly that the President chose to go beyond the statute and choose you? And I hope over the balance of this hearing that'll become clear. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman. I believe the President chose me to be the acting Attorney General for a couple reasons. First, I had served previously in the department as the United States Attorney, which is a very important position, as Mr. Radcliffe previously stated, and in the administration of justice. And for 13 months, I was the Chief of Staff for Attorney General Sessions, and I had done the full year with him side by side. Obviously, he made the decisions, but I gave him advice and counsel, and I was aware of everything that was going on at the Department of Justice that General Sessions wasn't recused from. And so I think the President was comfortable that to continue the momentum at the Department of Justice that we had established in addressing these important priority issues like reducing violent crime, combating the opioid crisis, and others, that the President felt I was best positioned to do the duties of Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just say to Mr. Whitaker, my questions normally in a normal oversight committee would be vastly different than the direction I'm going to go, because we've kind of wandered into this other stream over here. So I'm going to ask you some questions. The longstanding constitutionally based Department of Justice policy holds that a sitting president cannot be indicted. And that's based on the last review which happened during the Clinton administration. Is that still in effect, or has it changed?
That is still the policy of the Department of Justice.
Have you spoken to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein about his statements on invoking the 25th Amendment and wiretapping President Trump?
I have seen the statements by Deputy Rosenstein that he made to the press regarding those statements, and I have no reason to believe that he did not, that those statements were consistent with what he believed at the time.
Okay, I'm not sure I understood that. You said no reason to believe that they were not consistent, so there are a couple of negatives there. Do you believe they were consistent to what he believed at the time?
I do. I believe what Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein said to the press when it was first reported about his discussion.
Oh, you're talking about his comments, not his comments to the press, not the ones about him wearing a wire.
I'm talking about Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's comments to the press after it was reported that he had considered wearing a wire and invoking the 25th Amendment.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but his responses then you think are consistent. So did you talk to him about this issue at all?
I'm not here to talk about the internal discussions that I have with the.
But this is really critical. It's not, with all due respect, this is not an ongoing. This has nothing to do with an ongoing investigation. What it has got to do with is Mr. Rosenstein and his role as an unbiased overseer of the Mueller investigation. So it's not directly dealing with the investigation, but deals with his capacity to be unbiased. So I'm not asking whether, I'm not trying to get into the substance or even the periphery. I want to know, though, did you have a conversation with Mr. Rosenstein about his comments as reported?
Congressman, this is an important question to you, but I'm not going to answer my conversations with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. I believe that they are deliberative. Obviously, I'm exercising the full responsibilities of the acting Attorney General position.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. I know that that answer is important to you. I know that's important to you. But the answering in a way that we as the American people can understand, that's important to us. So let's get to June 21st, 2017, where you said the truth is there was no collusion with the Russians in the Trump campaign. There was interference by the Russians into the election, but there was not collusion with the campaign. That's where the left seems to be combining these two issues. The last thing they want right now is the truth to come out. And the fact that there's not a single piece of evidence that demonstrates that the Trump campaign had any illegal or even improper relationships with the Russians. It's that simple. Do you still adhere to that statement? Is that still true in your mind today?
Congressman, as I mentioned before to previous questioning about my statements as a private citizen before I joined the Department of Justice, those were made based on publicly available information, and I had no inside information. I did not know the details of the investigation. I obviously know the traditions of the Department of Justice, the rules and regulations, and I'm going to continue to follow those as I exercise the duties.
I remember the answers that you gave to other similar questions, but not this question here. And so that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, as we sit here today, a year and a half later, has your opinion changed from what you stated June 21st, 2017? Has it changed? That's a simple question. That's not hard.
Congressman, the special counsel's investigation is an ongoing investigation, and I'm not going to characterize that investigation or give you my opinion of that investigation as I sit here today.
So the scope memo indicates that the scope of the Mueller investigation was any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump, and two, any matters that arose or may arise directly from that investigation. Has that scope been expanded in any way?
Congressman, as I was discussing with Representative Jordan, I am not going to talk about the scope of the special counsel's.
All right, then I'll go forward then and say the indictments and the relation to scope one, Papadopoulos for false statements occurring after Mueller was appointed, Manafort for acts unrelated to the election or campaign, Gates acts unrelated to the election or the campaign, Flynn false statements about post-election conversations, Richard Pinetto unrelated to campaign or election, Cohen referred by Mueller to Southern District of New York because it was out of his scope, Sam Patton, not related to the 2016 election or campaign, and Stone for false statements occurring after Mueller was appointed. Not one indictment alleged an illegal relationship between a member of the Trump campaign and Russia. And that's consistent with what we've seen so far, and with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Acting AG, I actually wanted to ask you some questions regarding what you did prior to being Acting AG. It's my understanding that before you moved to the Department of Justice, that you were the Executive Director of the Foundation for Accountability and Civic and Trust.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a
fact is
point
a
of order.
conservative ethics
have a
watchdog
point
where
of
he
order.
made full use of the opportunity to call for
Gentleman will state his
investigations
point.
of
The
multiple
gentlelady will
Democrats.
suspend. The gentleman will state his point of order.
My point of order by the very statement from the gentlelady is outside the scope of an oversight investigative hearing on the Department of Justice.
It is not. You need to
That
let
is
me
not-
finish my question and you'll see
Gentlelady,
what I was
the
asking.
gentlelady will suspend. That is not a valid point of order. The gentlelady will continue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order, Rule pursuant 10 of the House rules, that the question is outside the scope of.
The gentlelady has the floor.
Are you just going to overrun a point of order?
Yeah, because you're.
Gentlelady will
state my
suspend.
point of order, or we just
The
gonna-
gentlelady will suspend. I ruled that it was not a valid point of order, and the gentlelady has the floor. The gentlelady will continue.
Thank you.
I was not through with
So
my
you-
point of order.
The gentlelady will continue.
Fill the ruling of the chair.
Move to table.
I move to table.
Motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair is before the committee. Motion to table is not debatable. The clerk will call the roll. One moment while we set up the clerk. Wait, slow down.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a unanimous consent request while we're waiting for this vote? Karen, since when is the bias of a witness not relevant to anything?
I was going to.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Deutsch. Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass. Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond. Mr. Richmond votes aye. Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline. Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu. Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Demings. Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia. Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath. Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton.
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Mucarsel-Powell.
Aye.
Ms. Mucarsel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar.
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner. Mr. Chabot. Mr. Gomert. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Buck. Mr. Ratcliffe. Ms. Roby. Ms. Roby votes nay. Mr. Gates. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko. Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe.
Is there any member of the committee who hasn't voted who wishes to vote? Ms. Lofgren.
Ms. Lofgren.
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye.
Is there any other member who hasn't voted who wishes to vote? The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 21, the noes are 8.
In that case, the motion to table is adopted. We return to Ms. Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Whitaker, during the time that you were the executive director of the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, you recommended that facts called for ethics investigations into or filed complaints about the following Democratic politicians, officials, and organizations: the Democratic National Committee, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Speaker Pelosi, Representative Ami Bera, Huffman, Lewis. In fact, the organization actually called for an investigation into a member of this committee, Representative Hank Johnson. So that's a total of about 46 individuals or organizations that over the time period when you were the executive director of FACT, that you called for either ethics investigations or filed complaints. So since you have joined the AG's office, I want to know whether or not any investigations have been initiated into those people. Well, just answer that, yes or no. Have there been investigations initiated into the people that you suggested be investigated during the time you were the ED of FACT?
Congresswoman, I was the executive director of the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust. We were an independent, nonpartisan ethics watchdog group. We did file ethics complaints against members of both parties.
You filed ethics complaints against Republicans. Can you tell me which Republicans you filed ethics complaints against?
All of, again, you know, I'm here for an oversight hearing. And
yes, you are. And
cannot
so my
imagine.
questions are leading to that. So can you answer that? Which Republicans did you file investigation or ask for ethics investigations of?
The nice thing about being an ethics watchdog group is that FACT filed all of its complaints on its website, and I would refer you to that.
I don't have time to look into the website. I'm asking you a question now. You were the executive director. Which Republicans did you file?
Congresswoman, again, as I sit here today, all I can do is refer you to the website.
Okay, so let me just ask this. Since you have been in the DOJ, have any complaints been initiated against the 46 Democrats, either individuals or organizations, in the time that you've been the acting AG?
Congresswoman, as I sit here today, I am not aware of any, but obviously if I had recommended as the executive director of FACT that someone be investigated, I would, and my recommendation was adopted by the Department of Justice, I'm certain that I could not be involved in that investigation.
You're certain, but you don't know whether did you recuse yourself?
You know, recusal decisions, I think this is important for everyone to understand, is recusal decisions are made based on a matter.
Let me move on. I wanted to ask questions about ethics guidance that you received in December. Did they recommend that you recuse yourself from any involvement in the criminal investigation into the World Patent Marketing, the fraudulent patent promotion scam to which you still owe almost $10,000 to the court? Did they provide an ethics opinion, or did you not seek one related to the World Patent Marketing matter?
Just to be clear, Congresswoman, who do you mean by they? Do you mean the ethics officials?
I'm asking you, what guidance did they recommend that you recuse yourself? So that's a question to you. Did they recommend that you recuse yourself from any involvement in the criminal investigation into the World Patent Marketing?
I am recused from the investigation into that company.
What about any matter involving Hillary Clinton? It's been well documented of your public calls for renewed investigations into matters related to Mrs. Clinton.
Again, any investigations into former Secretary Clinton, if they're open, confirmation or denial of a recusal would suggest that there is or is not an investigation regarding
You know, I actually
that person.
believe I have more time on the clock since I was interrupted.
I'm informed we paused the time.
Okay. Go ahead. Continue.
What I'm saying is your inquiry about whether or not I'm recused from any matter concerning former Secretary Clinton would by its very nature suggest that there is an open matter regarding Secretary Clinton. Any recusal decision that I would make would be based on what the matter was, and we'd go through the exact same analysis that I went through in the case of the special counsel's investigation.
Thank you.
At the request of a number of people, the committee will stand in recess for 5 minutes.
I get 5 minutes for lunch?